Hey there. You want to get a better understanding of the UK's Telecommunications Security Act.
The TSA.
Right, the TSA. It's a pretty dense topic, I have to say.
Yeah.
But we're going to try to break it down for you. We're using some articles that you sent over and even some excerpts from the TSA Code of Practice itself.
Perfect.
Yeah, should be fun. We're going to try to answer some of your questions like why does it even matter?
Right.
Who does it impact?
Yeah.
And what happens if you just ignore it?
Good questions.
And, of course, we've got to explore this whole privileged access management thing, PAM, right? Because that seems to be a pretty big piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. Well, it's certainly interesting to see how much global tension is kind of influencing policy right now.
Yeah.
We can really get a sense of that in these articles. All this talk about escalating cyber threats. That's really the foundation for understanding why the UK government felt the need for the TSA.
So it's about making sure that our communications networks are secure. In a world where those networks are becoming more and more vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Not just keeping the internet up and running, but protecting sensitive data.
Yeah.
And even, national security.
Absolutely. It goes beyond just the major telecom providers.
Okay.
The TSA actually affects a pretty wide range of companies from, the big players with turnovers over £1 billion.
Right.
Those are categorized as Tier 1.
Okay.
All the way down to medium size, those are Tier 2. And even smaller businesses in the supply chain, Tier 3.
And I imagine there are some deadlines for all these companies to comply with the TSA.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
The deadlines are staggered based on these tiers.
Right.
So Tier 1 companies, they had to comply by March 31st, 2024.
Okay.
While the Tier 2 organizations have a bit more time.
Okay.
Until March 31st, 2025.
Got it.
And the consequences for missing those deadlines can be pretty significant.
Let's talk about those consequences then. What happens if a company just decides to ignore the TSA?
Well, they could be facing some pretty hefty fines. We're talking fines of up to 10% of their annual turnover.
Wow.
That's a serious chunk of change.
That would definitely get someone's attention.
For sure.
And what about companies that kind of drag their feet even after those initial deadlines?
Well, the penalties continue to rack up. The TSA allows for daily fines of £100,000 for ongoing non-compliance.
Yeah.
So the longer a company ignores the regulations, the more it's going to cost them.
Wow. Clearly, the UK government means business with this TSA. Now, let's dive into this privileged access management concept, or PAM. Can you explain what PAM is and why it's so crucial for TSA compliance?
Yeah. Imagine someone having the keys to the most sensitive parts of your network.
Okay.
That's what privileged access is all about. It gives users the ability to control and modify critical systems and data. And PAM is all about managing those keys.
Okay.
It's a set of security measures designed to control and monitor who has these high-level permissions.
Right.
What they can do with them and when and where they can use them.
So it's not just about keeping, the bad guys out.
Right.
It's also about making sure that even the authorized users are only doing what they're supposed to be doing.
You got it. It's about minimizing the risk of human error, insider threats,
right,
and even unintentional mistakes that could, compromise security. And the TSA recognizes PAM as a foundational element of a secure telecom network.
Okay.
In fact, it mandates specific PAM practices that companies need to implement to comply with the regulations.
Now, our listener mentioned a solution called Kron PAM.
Right.
How does a system like that help companies tackle these TSA requirements?
So Kron PAM is a tool specifically designed to help organizations implement robust PAM practices.
Okay.
Let's look at an example from the TSA's Code of Practice, the section on management plane.
Okay.
One requirement is regularly reviewing and updating privileged user access rights.
Makes sense.
So if someone changes roles or leaves the company, their access should be immediately revoked.
You wouldn't want somebody walking around with keys that they don't need anymore.
Precisely. And Kron PAM makes this process much easier.
Okay.
It lets you define very specific granular access controls.
Okay.
You can set up rules based on roles, responsibilities, time of day, location, you name it.
Oh, wow.
So this ensures that the right people have the right level of access at the right time and nothing more.
Okay, so Kron PAM helps automate and enforce those fine-grained access controls.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of pressure off the IT team, I imagine. What other security measures does the TSA highlight in this management plane section?
Another important requirement is the mandatory logging of all privileged access activities.
Okay.
So basically, it's like having a detailed security camera recording who did what, when, and from where within the network.
So if something goes wrong, investigators can basically rewind the tape and see exactly what happened.
Got it.
And who was responsible.
And that's another area where Kron PAM excels. Its Session Manager feature keeps a complete audit trail of all privileged activities, making it much easier to investigate security incidents and demonstrate compliance.
So it's not just about preventing those security breaches. It's also about having that detailed record keeping in case something does go wrong. What other aspects of PPAM does the TSA focus on in this section?
There's a strong emphasis on secure communication protocols.
Right.
The TSA requires that whenever possible, privileged access must be conducted through secure, encrypted, and authenticated channels. No more sending sensitive commands or data over unsecured connections.
It's like using a secure tunnel to transmit sensitive information instead of just sending it out in the open where anyone could intercept it.
That's a great analogy. And Kron PAM helps enforce this requirement by using a secure proxy-based approach. It ensures that all connections are properly encrypted and authenticated, adding an extra layer of protection against eavesdropping and data breaches.
So far, we've talked about access control, activity logging, and secure connections. That sounds like a pretty solid security foundation.
Right.
But what about passwords?
Right.
Those always seem to be a weak link in any security system.
Yeah.
What does the TSA have to say about password management?
Well, the TSA is very specific about password security. They require organizations to change default passwords on all devices and services before they're used.
Yeah, it's surprising how often those default passwords kind of slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
You'd think it would be Security 101.
Right.
But attackers are constantly scanning the internet,
Right.
looking for those easy targets with those default settings still in place.
So it's like leaving the welcome mat out for the bad guys.
Pretty much.
And the potential consequences could be, really devastating.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, if an attacker gains access using a default password,
Right.
they could potentially steal sensitive data,
Yeah.
disrupt services,
Yeah.
or even cause physical damage to infrastructure. It's a reminder that these seemingly small oversights can have huge repercussions in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So how does Kron PAM help organizations address this password vulnerability?
Well, Kron PAM offers a secure, centralized password vault.
Okay.
So instead of having passwords scattered across systems
All right.
or written down on sticky notes.
Which I'm sure happens more often than you think.
Oh, more often than you think.
Yeah.
Kron PAM stores all those passwords securely.
Right.
Using encryption and multi-factor authentication for access.
Okay.
It even enforces strong password policies
Ah.
and can automatically rotate passwords.
So it really takes the guesswork out of password management.
Takes all the best work out.
Okay, so Kron PAM takes care of that password problem.
Yep.
What other vulnerabilities does the TSA kind of target?
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about third-party suppliers.
Okay.
Telecom providers often rely on external companies for various services.
Right.
And these third parties often need access to the provider's systems to actually do their jobs.
Right.
And the TSA recognizes that this is a potential security risk and has a whole section dedicated to managing third-party access.
So it's not just about securing your own house. You also need to make sure that your guests aren't bringing in any unwanted baggage.
Exactly. One of the requirements in this section is the removal or changing of default passwords and accounts for all devices on the provider's network.
Yeah.
This applies to any device that a third party might access, even indirectly.
So it's like this chain reaction security measure.
Yeah.
Even if the provider has their own security practices in place, they need to make sure that their partners are following the same rigorous standards.
Absolutely. It's a shared responsibility model.
Okay.
And Kron PAM can help providers manage these third-party relationships more securely.
Okay.
Its role-based access control features allow you to create very granular access profiles for different types of third-party users, limiting their permissions to only what's absolutely necessary for their specific tasks.
It really starts to paint this picture of how layered and interconnected all these security measures are.
For sure.
What other requirements does the TSA impose on third-party access?
There's a particularly interesting requirement around dedicated workstations for third-party administrators. The TSA mandates that each third-party administrator must use a logically independent, privileged access workstation for each provider they work with.
Hold on. So it's not enough to just have those secure login credentials. They actually need a separate isolated workstation for each client they're working with.
That's right. It seems extreme.
Yeah.
But it's all about minimizing the risk of what we call cross-contamination.
Okay.
If a third-party administrator is using the same workstation to access multiple clients' systems,
Right.
there's a chance that malware or other security vulnerabilities could spread from one client to another.
It's like those quarantine protocols you see in hospitals, where they isolate patients with highly contagious diseases to prevent that spread of infection.
Exactly.
But in this case, it's digital contamination that we're trying to prevent.
Exactly.
So how does Kron PAM address this multi-workstation requirement?
Well, Kron PAM has built-in features specifically designed for managing multiple clients or tenants.
Okay.
It's called multi-tenant MSPM SSP functionality.
Okay.
Think of it like having separate secure apartments within a larger building.
Okay.
Each third-party administrator gets their own isolated and secure access point to the provider's network,
Right.
preventing any kind of accidental sharing of data or security vulnerability.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a way to provide that secure and segregated access without having to physically set up a whole bunch of different computers.
Exactly.
What else does the TSA emphasize when it comes to securing third-party access?
Well, they're big on logging and recording all third-party administrator access.
Okay.
So just like with internal users, the TSA requires a detailed audit trail of everything those external administrators do within the provider's network.
So it's about maintaining that same level of transparency and accountability,
Yeah.
regardless of whether the user is an employee or an external contractor.
Exactly. And Kron PAM's session manager handles this automatically,
Yeah.
logging every action taken by a third-party administrator,
Right.
including the time, date, and specific commands used.
Okay, let's move on to another key area highlighted in the TSA. Virtualization.
Okay.
Many telecom providers use virtualized environments to run their networks more efficiently.
Sure.
But this also introduces new security challenges.
Of course.
What does the TSA have to say about securing these virtualized systems?
Well, the TSA recognizes that virtualized environments need special attention.
Okay.
One requirement is that any modifications to databases or systems critical to network operation require sign-off from two authorized persons.
So it's like that two-person rule you see in sensitive military operations, where you need two separate individuals to authorize, like the launch of a missile or something.
That's right.
It's about preventing any single person from having too much control.
Right.
Or making a potentially catastrophic mistake.
Precisely. And it applies to those critical systems that underpin the telecom network.
Right.
Imagine someone accidentally or intentionally deleting a critical database.
Yeah, that would be bad.
That could have a major impact on service availability.
Yeah.
So this two-person rule adds an extra layer of protection against human error or malicious intent.
Makes sense. So how does Kron PAM help enforce this two-person rule within a virtualized environment?
Well, Kron PAM's advanced database access management features can be configured to implement this type of control.
Right.
You can set up multi-factor authentication, requiring a second person to approve any sensitive changes, or even implement more complex approval workflows involving multiple layers of authorization.
So it's not just about controlling access. It's about building in those checks and balances to prevent those potentially harmful mistakes.
Exactly.
What other security considerations does the TSA highlight for virtualized environments?
The TSA is very clear that privileged access to the virtualization fabric, that's the underlying infrastructure that supports all those virtual machines, must occur only over authenticated and encrypted channels.
So it's like having a secure encrypted tunnel leading into that virtual data center. No unauthorized access allowed.
Exactly. And Kron PAM provides that secure tunnel. Using encrypted protocols like SSH, RDP, and HTTPS.
Got it.
It ensures that all communication with the virtualization fabric is protected from eavesdropping and tampering.
Okay, that's reassuring. It's good to know that those virtual environments are locked down tight.
Yeah.
What other safeguards does the TSA recommend for virtualization?
Well, they also emphasize limiting the number of privileged accounts for the virtualization fabric. It's a principle of least privilege in action. The fewer people who have those high-level permissions, the smaller the attack surface and the lower the risk of something going wrong.
So it's not about having a whole army of administrators. It's about having a small, trusted team with the necessary skills and oversight.
Exactly. And Kron PAM helps achieve this balance with its single sign-on capabilities. You can consolidate accounts, reducing the overall number of privileged credentials without sacrificing accountability or control. Each action is still tied to a specific user, even if they're using a shared account.
We've covered a lot of ground here,
Yeah.
from managing passwords and securing third-party access
We have.
to locking down virtualized environments. It's clear that the TSA takes a comprehensive approach to cybersecurity,
It does.
looking at all these potential vulnerabilities and attack
For
vectors.
sure.
But I have a feeling there's still more to come.
Yeah.
You're right. We've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
Let's dive into another critical aspect of the TSA, network oversight function.
And an OS.
NOF, right.
Yeah.
These are specialized systems that telecom providers use to monitor and manage their networks.
Right.
And the TSA dedicates a whole section to securing these NOF systems.
They recognize how crucial they are.
It sounds like these NOF systems are kind of like the control centers for managing the entire network.
In a way, yeah.
I imagine they contain a lot of sensitive data and tools.
Absolutely. They're essentially the nerve centers of the telecom network.
Right.
And the TSA has some pretty stringent requirements for protecting them.
Oh.
One of the key principles is limiting access to these NOF systems to a very small, trusted group of privileged users.
It's like those high-security areas in movies where only a select few have clearance to enter.
Yeah.
You need special authorization and maybe even a retinal scan to get through the door.
That's a good analogy. The TSA is all about minimizing that risk of unauthorized access to these critical systems.
Right.
And Kron PAM can play a key role in enforcing those access controls.
Okay. It allows you to define very granular roles and permissions, ensuring that only authorized individuals can access specific NOF tools and functions.
So Kron PAM acts as that virtual gatekeeper.
In a way, yeah.
Right? Controlling who gets in and what they can do once they're inside. What other security measures does the TSA recommend for NOF systems?
Well, another important requirement is that the management functions used to access NOF systems, things like jump servers or remote access tools, should only be accessible from designated privileged access workstations.
So it's not enough to just have secure credentials. You also need to be using a trusted device that meets specific security standards.
That's right. It adds another layer of protection, like having a secure airlock before you can enter the control room.
Right, okay. And Kron PAM provides that extra layer of security
It does.
by offering secure, single sign-on access to those NOF management functions.
Exactly.
It ensures that everything is locked down tight and that only authorized users from trusted devices can gain access.
That makes sense. It's about minimizing those potential entry points for attackers.
For sure.
What other safeguards does the TSA mandate for accessing NOF systems?
Well, the TSA emphasizes the importance of pre-authorization for any management access to those NOF functions.
Okay.
This means that before someone can even attempt to access those systems, they need approval from someone in a supervisory role.
So it's like having a security checkpoint where someone verifies your credentials and your purpose before letting you through the gate.
That's a great way to put it.
It's a way to prevent any unauthorized or accidental access attempts.
Precisely, and Kron PAM can help organizations implement these pre-authorization workflows.
Okay.
It allows you to, leverage multi-factor authentication or even set up managerial approval processes before granting access to sensitive NOF systems.
So it's not just about having the technical controls in place. It's also about having those human checks and balances.
Right.
To ensure that everything is done by the book.
Absolutely. It's a layered approach to security. You need the technical tools to enforce access controls and monitor activity.
Right.
But you also need those human processes to oversee everything and make sure those tools are being used correctly.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a scenario that hopefully never happens. But we need to plan for emergencies.
Yeah.
What happens when normal access methods fail?
Okay.
Say there's a major outage or a security incident, and you need to regain control of critical systems quickly. Does the TSA address this type of emergency access?
It does. It recognizes that there will be times when you need to bypass those normal security protocols
Right.
to respond to an emergency. That's where break glass accounts come in.
Break glass accounts.
Yeah.
That sounds intense.
It is.
What are those exactly?
Imagine a fire alarm behind a glass case with a hammer next to it.
Okay.
You only break that glass in case of a real emergency.
Right.
Break glass accounts are similar. They're highly privileged accounts designed for emergency access.
Okay.
And they're typically used when regular access methods are unavailable.
So it's like that emergency override button,
Kind of, yeah.
right, for those like, oh, crap moments when something goes seriously wrong.
Right.
I imagine the TSA has some pretty strict rules about these break glass accounts.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. You wouldn't want those like emergency keys falling into the wrong hands.
Absolutely. The TSA is very specific about how these break glass accounts should be managed.
Okay.
One of the key requirements is that each break glass account must have a unique, strong password for each individual piece of network equipment.
So no, using the same generic password for everything.
No, right.
That's smart. You wouldn't want someone stumbling upon like a single master key that unlocks the entire network.
Right.
It defeats the whole purpose of having those separate break glass accounts.
Exactly. And to make things even more secure, the TSA recommends that those break glass credentials should be single use.
Oh, wow.
You use them once during the emergency, and then they're immediately disabled.
So it's like those self-destructing messages in spy movies.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
You use them once and then poof, they're gone.
Exactly.
No chance of someone reusing those credentials later on.
Exactly. And you guessed it, Kron PAM can help organizations manage these break glass accounts securely.
Okay.
It can enforce unique, strong passwords for each account and automatically rotate them after each use.
Okay.
Making sure those emergency credentials are only available when they're absolutely needed.
That's reassuring to know. Kron PAM seems to have all the bases covered when it comes to managing privileged access, even in those high-pressure, emergency situations.
Yeah.
What else does the TSA say about the use of these break glass accounts?
Another important requirement is that any activity undertaken using a break glass account must be fully recorded.
Okay.
Think of it like having a security camera that captures every move those privileged users make during an emergency.
So there's no room for ambiguity or questionable actions. Everything is documented and can be reviewed later if needed.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense from an accountability standpoint.
Absolutely. And Kron PAM's session manager comes into play here.
Okay.
It diligently records every command, every keystroke, everything that happens during those break glass sessions.
Wow.
Those recordings can be used later to verify that the emergency procedures were followed correctly.
Right.
And that no unauthorized actions were taken.
It sounds like the TSA is really trying to eliminate any potential blind spots when it comes to privileged access.
They are.
It's about having that complete visibility into those high-level activities, no matter the circumstances.
That's a great way to put it. It's about transparency and accountability at every level.
Now, we've talked a lot about controlling and monitoring privileged access, but are there any recommendations in the TSA about how organizations should actually perform those administrative tasks?
Right.
Is there a preferred method for making changes to network configurations or system settings?
That's a great question, and the TSA does have some recommendations about that.
Okay.
It generally discourages privileged users from having direct access to network equipment for making administrative changes.
Okay.
Instead, it encourages organizations to use dedicated administrative systems that act as intermediaries.
So rather than having a privileged user log directly into a router or a switch, they would use a separate administrative system.
Right.
That makes those changes on their behalf.
Exactly. It's like having a control panel where you can push buttons to make things happen.
Right.
Instead of tinkering directly with the machinery.
Yeah.
It reduces the risk of accidental or malicious changes.
Right.
And it provides a more centralized point of control and auditing.
That makes sense. It adds that layer of abstraction
Right.
between the user and the critical equipment.
Exactly.
Reducing that potential for human error or malicious actions. Does Kron PAM integrate with these administrative systems?
Yes, it does. Kron PAM has integrations with various administrative systems, commonly used in the telecom industry, allowing organizations to manage those privileged operations securely and seamlessly.
Great.
It helps maintain that centralized control and oversight that the TSA emphasizes.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the UK's Telecommunications Security Act. From managing privileged access to securing virtualized environments, implementing strong password policies, and even planning for emergencies. It's clear that the TSA leaves no stone unturned when it comes to cybersecurity.
It's a comprehensive and demanding set of regulations, but it's all designed to protect those critical telecom networks from a growing array of threats. And as we've seen throughout our discussion, solutions like Kron PAM can play a really crucial role in helping organizations achieve and maintain compliance with those requirements.
It's been a fascinating exploration. We learned about the why behind these regulations, the specific requirements that organizations need to address, and even some practical steps they can take to enhance their security posture. And a big takeaway for me is just the importance of having the right tools in place.
Absolutely.
To automate those security processes and make compliance more manageable.
Couldn't agree more. Trying to manage all these complex security requirements manually would be well, a nightmare.
Yeah.
Solutions like Kron PAM provide that much-needed automation and control, allowing security teams to focus on the bigger picture and proactively address emerging threats.
Well said. And that wraps up our deep dive into the UK's Telecommunications Security Act. We hope you found this exploration informative and insightful. Remember, cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay secure.